Everyone, and welcome to today's elemental session on resident engagement and decarbonisation, and particularly thinking about social housing. We'll be looking at how important resident engagement is as part of wider retrofit programmes. The panel we've got with us here today, hopefully we won't have any tech problems and lose anyone halfway through. At the moment we have Sara Edmonds, who is co-director of the National Retrofit Hub, Leanne Kelly, who is an economist at DG Cities, and Filipe Amarante, project manager at National Energy Action. Hi everyone and welcome. We've got some talking points lined up today that we're going to work through. Then we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience. On your screens you'll see a little box with a question mark on. That is the Q&A box, so anything that you want to ask the panel you can stick it in there. You can also just add things to the chat, sort of the main chat box if you want to, comments, questions, links to interesting stuff, anything like that can go in there. We'll try and get to as many audience questions as we can today in the time that we've got set aside. So let's get right into it and start off with some more information on our panellists and on this topic.
I'm good.
I don't really think Julia realises we can still hear her.
It's unbearable. My heart is in pieces.
I said we'd get technical problems, didn't we? Can I shut her up? Yes.
I thought it was going to be me. Like, I'm just here with the audience. I have had the worst tech morning.
Honestly,
I'm glad that it wasn't me making it.
Yeah. Appreciate that we've all been having tech disasters this morning. Julia's been sorting everyone out, but not herself, apparently. Right. As I was saying, let's get right into it. Sara, can we start with you? Can you introduce yourself in more detail, and also the National Retrofit Hub, which some people might not have heard of as it's a relatively new organisation.
Sure.
And can you talk about, from your perspective, how crucial that resident engagement is to sort of successful retrofit projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So hi, morning everybody. My name is Sara Edmonds and I am co-director of the National Retrofit Hub. I think because it's probably quite pertinent to the topic that we're discussing today, it's also worth knowing my other role is Head of Citizen Engagement with Built Environment Smarter Transformation. So there's a kind of a clue in the title of the role there. But a little bit about the National Retrofit Hub. Yes, we are a relatively new initiative, but we are working quickly at pace to essentially do what we can to accelerate the delivery of retrofit at scale and at pace across the UK. And essentially that's about convening people, because anybody who works in retrofit at all will know that there's a need to bring together the work that's happening. There's a lot of excellent work happening in retrofit, but I think sometimes it feels that that's happening in a sort of a less collective way than maybe it could be. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating for a lot of people in retrofit, as I said, who are doing really great work, but just we're trying to help build up the I'm slightly distracted by people saying they can't hear anything, so I don't know. Can everybody hear? Somebody in the audience gives a thumbs up. Not a thing. Good for me. Okay, so Steve, I think maybe that's on your end. Oh,
okay, so Steve's been outvoted, so hopefully most people can hear.
Had to tap to unmute though. Can hear fine. Okay, thank you people for letting us know. We're all human. Is this the like post-summer holiday back to school?
Honestly, these things normally go really smoothly. Sorry, Sara, please do carry on. Oh, and now Sara's frozen. This, I feel like I'm in some kind of alternate universe. Can anyone hear me? Is everyone frozen? Have we lost Sara? I think we have, haven't we?
Right. I can hear you fine.
Right, we'll hopefully get Sara back. She did say they were digging up the road outside her house, so there might have been some connectivity issues. So we'll move on to Leanne and hopefully get Sara back in a minute. Leanne, so your role at DG Cities, you focus on people, don't you? The people side of innovation. So can you tell us sort of what your priorities are within that?
Sure, thanks, Lucy, and yeah, really pleased to be here today. So yeah, hopefully the internet will be kind to me today. So yeah, my name's Leanne Kelly. I'm a behavioural economist in our DG Cities team. Our team is a mix of different disciplines, so social behavioural sciences, but also technology, infrastructure, net zero specialists, and those who have worked in local authorities for quite a long time. So we like to come to these projects with, we hope, quite a broad perspective. But yeah, DG Cities, we were set up and were owned by a local authority. So we think that really gives us an understanding of the challenges that councils face with their net zero objectives, with the key role they're playing, and often with limited resource. But we also work with other authorities, private sector, with innovators and with academia. I think that's a key part of why we were set up, really, is to try to bring some of that information, research experience back into the council and play a bit of a knowledge exchange role. Good to see Sara back there. So kind of a key part of what we do, and it's about trying to apply innovation, which could be about technology, but it could also be about the approaches, the ways we do it, the way we design, the way we engage, given what works for local people and communities. I think really our priorities are, to support authorities in decarbonisation, to try to come at that with a holistic and integrated approaches, but also working with the right partners. And we've been really lucky to work with good technology partners, but also great partners on the community side to build on local groups, but also, those who really understand people and communities. So I think, a really key part of what we try to do is to understand people and throughout project stages. So really try to understand user and current non-user experiences, think about individual motivations, their needs, potential outcomes, but also think about how sort of system level factors can impact those, the individuals and their potential outcomes as well. So really trying to, keep it in mind the barriers and then how we can address those. And I think for DG Cities, when we think about barriers, we're often looking at digital inclusion. We're often looking at what people's current information and knowledge is, and thinking about where there might be opportunities for co-benefits or to integrate other work alongside, say, retrofit intervention. So looking at areas of integration and really trying to understand where motivations and opportunities could sit for individuals to uptake, to sign up and to engage in these types of interventions. But yeah, so we sort of we have pieces both on the research side, which we're really keen to be involved with and to utilise that work for the council, but then alongside that, on the ground projects where we work with partners to design, deliver, and then really sort of test and evaluate interventions in this space. But yeah, I'm happy to give some examples on those projects of research, but I'll hand back to you, Lucy, for now. Sure.
Just going on to one of the things you mentioned there, just if you could explain it a little bit more for me. So when you say digital barriers, what exactly is meant by that? That the solutions are digital and people aren't comfortable working with those? Is that sort of literally what that means, or have I completely misunderstood?
No, not at all. I think solutions don't always need to be digital. But for example, if you was to have an engagement program where some of that was online or came through messages, I think through different stages need to think, are there any barriers here where some people could be excluded because they're not adept with technology or they're not comfortable with digital forms of communication? I mean, some of the products that we've looked at some, in-home smart devices, some monitors. So there's times when the product itself is quite digital and we're looking at how we can support people to kind of be ready for those types of interventions. But it's also thinking earlier on around engagement and information sharing. Can people have access to information in ways that suit them as well? And if we are going to be using digital, parts of that or online forums, how can we support people to be more familiar and comfortable with those channels? So I think that's sort of when we think about digital barriers, I'd say that.
Brilliant, thank you. Moving on to you, Filipe. So you're from National Energy Action. So can you talk about, for anyone who isn't familiar with them, what NEA do, what their role is, but also the sort of schemes that you've worked on and what they've taught you about resident engagement?
I will. Hi, everyone. I hope my internet is working fine, given the series of internet issues we're having. Normally, it doesn't. So I work for National Energy Action, and we are a fuel poor charity, and the core of our work is to provide energy advice for people in full poverty. The project that I manage, and that's the one that I'll be talking a lot today, is a retrofit scheme that went really wrong in Preston, and we started to help repair this project and the properties in this area. It sits a little bit outside of what NEA used to do, and it was our first time, so we have a lot of lessons learned to share, and I'm glad to be here. What happened in Preston? Preston was in 2013 there was a CESP scheme, an energy scheme that installed external wall insulation in around 450 properties, and for several reasons, due to the time of the installation of the measures, the poor workmanship, the inexisting detail, no supervision, there were no warranties after. A lot of these homes presented issues with the external wall insulation, the EWI, and NEA came across the situation, and we didn't think this was right. Something that was supposed to make a home warmer and safer made them damper and impossible to live in some of these cases. And this is the project I've been managing for the past 2 to 3 years, and it's been interesting, and there's a lot to share. But when it comes to engagement, I think in Preston we found quite an interesting challenge where we had to engage with the community that had no trust in any managing agent, had been poorly treated by all parties that installed the measures in their homes in the past. So we had some really interesting and hard challenges to come where we come today and to get ingrained in the community. And it was it's been an interesting journey.
So there was a lot of sort of starting from scratch really for you then, building up trust with the community for the project, I imagine.
Yes, correct. We started from scratch, and I think after being there for 3 years, some people still are not really sure who NEA is, because there's so many parties involved in this project, as you can imagine. But we started from scratch, and introducing ourselves to the community, it was really a challenge, especially also we did it most through COVID. But engaging with local stakeholders, with the local MP office, which has been extremely supportive, getting to the community, door-to-door knocking, and etc. was vital. And after a few years, we managed to create a good working relationship. But it's been a challenge. I won't say it hasn't, but it was pivotal for this project. I know Julia left a few links in the chat. If anyone wants to read it up in the chat, there's a link to our website from NEA, and there's a link for an article in Passive House that has some pictures. So if you want to get a perception of the poor detailing that the houses were facing, there will be, you can find them there. I don't want to share my screen to make sure we don't don't touch anything.
Yeah, if you scroll up in the chat, you'll see there's some links there, and I'll post them again at the end of the session for anyone who wants to see them. So Sara, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Going back to you, so you were just telling us about your other role and the sort of importance of that that focus on residents and the citizen. So do you want to just sort of finish that off a little bit with the sort of setting your perspective on this topic? Yeah.
So just finishing on the National Retrofit Hub, the roundabout on that is that we're here to convene all of the good work that's happening, and we're focusing into 6 different working groups. And we can share the web link in the chat so people can find out. And if you are interested in any of those working groups, the door is wide open, and we're really keen to get as many voices focusing on these different areas as possible. It's not a talking shop. We have got sort of a theory of change for what we're actually trying to achieve. And each working group has that focus that's being developed out. So we're looking at warm, healthier, net zero homes right the way through to driving uptake, looking at financial mechanisms, looking at that whole broad piece, technologies and techniques, the whole lot. And it's really exciting space, actually, and people are coming with such goodwill and a great deal of knowledge, and that's what we want to see more of. So it's that kind of the engagement amongst the community of people involved in retrofit is also really, really crucial, and I think there's really goodwill there to leverage on. But I did want to just come back, and maybe some of the stuff about the roles that I have and the work that I do will come out in our conversation. But the most key word that I heard Filipe mention there was trust. Mm-hmm. None of this works if there isn't trust. If there isn't trust between residents and the whole system of things that's happening to them, which is, again, we'll come back to the language there about what happens to people and what happens with people. Mm-hmm. But trust between the supply chain, trust between the clients who are procuring the work, like the trust is the bit that's just really a deep, deep problematic systemic issue that we've got to face. But what's great about it is that it's also a really pleasurable thing to build. And it helps you see the potential in developing work, bringing it together. If we kind of turn our perspective outward and engage, but we've got to believe it. You've got to believe it as a person as well. You've got to really want this to succeed. And I'm seeing that so much in the industry and in the people who are like working hard at retrofit, because it's hard and nobody gets into this unless they're actually passionate about it, because it's really, really tricky. But the trust is really fundamental. And I think I'm really interested, like, in what Leanne was saying as well, about the methods by which you communicate, but also what you're communicating, and whether or not it is this notion of kind of, we're all familiar with this notion of being of carrying out consultations, right? I'm an architect by background, so I have been the architect staying up late doing the drawings to wheel them into a community centre, where essentially whoever happens to show up because they maybe caught wind of there being a consultation got to say pick A or B with nothing else. And that's not really engagement. That's not really involving communities, people in the transformation of places, which is what ultimately retrofit is about. So when we talk about engagement, it's also got to be looking at the governance, the ownership, the involvement, like how are you engaging? And is it meaningful? Is it that communities, people, residents, supply chain actually feel that it matters what they think and that they had a hand in it? Because this isn't about a change of colour of curtain fabric that will come again. Like, we don't have time to get this wrong. We don't have time to do Preston. Like, Preston was so problematic, and the fallout, I mean, Filipe, you mentioned years, this is like, you get this wrong, you are in trouble, and you don't have to get it wrong, because actually we've got a lot of information that we can learn lessons from. But it's the trust piece. So, anybody who was involved in Preston and anybody who was like adjacently involved in a scheme like that or touched by a scheme like that, where you start there is with trust. You've got a long way to build that back up in that particular scheme, but then you have this great opportunity to learn from that. So for me, like, engagement, the whole thing starts with trust and making it meaningful. So yes, how you communicate that is also part of how you make it meaningful, but exactly how much people are involved, and it's difficult because our procurement structures aren't set up for this. There's no money to be made in engaging people on a long, involved process. But that is what we have to address, and that's what we have to change.
Yeah, so it's about the sort of wider industry seeing the value of it, I guess, because it's not something that you can see pounds and pence next to in the same way that you can.
Yeah,
products.
But actually, this is a false economy as well. You maybe can't see the pounds and pence against it when you look at a spreadsheet of costs up front. But again, I think something that Leanne talked about, which I was really interested in, is what's the long game? What's the long game, and what are the co-benefits, which I personally find like that phrase which we use to describe what we mean by the non-financial benefits or the non-energy benefits of retrofit. Actually, it's not co-benefit, is it? It's a front and center benefit to developing resilient communities, people who are safe from fuel poverty, people who are safe from like the health impacts, and then the agencies who are involved in having to pick up the pieces. So the NHS, Thames Water, whoever your utilities companies are, education, you know, parks, the whole lot has something to gain from regenerating neighborhoods, rebuilding and creating more resilience, which is what Retrofit is about. It's about resilience, and we have to be honest about what we're trying to do, because it's not about sort of cleaning up in the business as usual model. It's about a new way of looking at our neighborhoods, the space between the buildings, you know. And so when you take on Retrofit ideas, we have this huge opportunity to be looking at these integrated place-based approaches, you know. And again, that's quite difficult to understand that, because you have to get a lot of people around the table. You have to get people to look into the future and recognize that this type of investment is a long-term benefit that's going to bring better outcomes for people. And I'm really passionate about that, because I really think there's a lot of good work happening, but we don't have the time to allow those things to evolve organically anymore. Like, we have got to get behind the stuff that's really good, novel, coming through. Also, the good work that's happening, strengthen that and make that more. It's going to be a little bit messy. It's not going to be perfect. We don't have time to kind of craft the perfect reality of like what this is, but we do have to, where we see good work, we have an obligation to make that visible and to bring that forward collectively.
Well, I'm in. I agree with everything you just. It was like listening to a political speech.
Okay.
Some great comments coming in on the chat. Do keep them coming, and add any questions for the panel that you've got. Talking about something that all three of you have mentioned, collaboration. You know, obviously this can't happen without collaborating with the residents, with partners, with different organisations. So, Filipe, obviously you've mentioned that there's various people involved in the project that you're on at the moment in Preston. So can you sort of outline how you've been working with other organisations on the project, and what has sort of worked effectively in terms of engagement, what methods you've used, any sort of top tips you can share with us?
I have to say I'm very engaged with Sara's speech as well. Very passionate. I'll give you more of a hands-on approach. It's the project that we're running. It's a delivery project, and like Sara mentioned, trust is vital, and communication. It's super important to bring this trust up. Someone mentioned in the chat that landlords should use their own customers as ambassadors, and this is one of the approaches that we did. We got to help the project, we got a resident liaison officer from the community, a person that communicates with everyone and connects the residents with the contractors, with the designers, with the surveyors, with all these different parties that will go into their homes, their private space, and they need to trust. And if you have someone ingrained and in the community, this process will be smoother. And to be honest, we're developing Fishwick in phases. And in phase 1, we didn't have that much engagement from the community. Now in phase 2, after people seeing some outcomes of their neighbors, people started to engage drastically. So there's a lot of managing the expectations of the first people going to get the retrofit done, and then the following waves of people. And managing expectations of the residents has to be a single process, so everyone has to provide the same information from the first managing agent, from the designers, from the contractors. So everyone provides the same information. If there's loopholes here or different messages in between parties, this will create entropy, this will lose the trust, and therefore will have an extra cost to address these. And there's actually a financial benefit here if you have a very good resident liaison officer or community champion, whatever you might call it. And lastly, I have to say, Sara mentioned consultations with the community, and that's one of the things that we were understanding our communications were not flowing correctly. So we did what we call the community focus or community insight groups, where we invite different people from the community to attend, sit with us, and we just raise some questions, and it was a little bit of a research role, or to understand how can we improve the service that we're going to deliver you and hear you. And this made people much more engaged, heard, again, building the trust and feeling part of the process, feeling that their decisions matter and they are in the center of the process. Because at the end of the day, it's their homes. And it doesn't matter how the tenure works or what type of landlord you are, or if you're not even the landlord like we are not. You have to. It's the people, the resident clients, or the tenants, or the people that live in the homes that should feel heard, respected, trust, and that will give us trust. Yeah, this is my top tips, I would say.
Sarah, from your perspective, are there any steps that you would suggest people to get started with resident engagement if you're talking about housing associations or local authorities? What should be the sort of gold standard of how they start things off, in your opinion?
I mean, it's a big question. I think it depends what the relationships are like. And I think there may be two things that you need to start with before you kind of rush out to engage or do anything. Number one is understanding what the current relationships are, like where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, what's the current condition. So like, do an assessment, little retrofit assessment of your relationships first. So like to find out, where are the strengths and the weaknesses of those. Then I would say that it is to, you got to understand where those relationships are, and then you've got to understand what it is that you're trying to talk to people about. So it's mapping, really. I think what we tend to do is we all feel this urgency, and I did speak really passionately about that urgency and that need to take action, and I do believe that is the case. But the first step often is we want to run into the solution without first mapping and understanding the landscape that we're sitting within. And again, I think it's important that we move forward at pace, but with caution. So mapping and understanding the condition of the relationships, but also the opportunities that exist. So who are the community leaders? Like, who are the people that already have trust established? I'd like to just give a little a case study, maybe, as an example. So there is an organisation in Birmingham, in inner city Birmingham, called, actually it's not quite an organisation, but I'll get to that. It's called Retrofit Balsall Heath. It is actually not, they've not created a separate entity. They are bringing together existing communities within this neighbourhood in city centre of Birmingham called Balsall Heath. It was a site where there was a LADS type scheme available, and the local authority, within the limited statutory means provided to them to communicate with the community, was a letter drop. So this letter drop happened, and a very tiny percentage of response was received from the local authority in terms of who said, yeah, okay, I'll let you come in and do this work to my home. So there's an opportunity was seen here amongst this quite active community, led by people like the Bahu Trust, the MEC community, with Zero Carbon House and John Christopher's. There's like quite an active community there, but they saw the opportunity to come together. So in the end, I think they brought together about, I want to say 26 different community organizations. One of those community organizations might have been somebody who was crocheting, tea cozies to sell at a market, one single person, but they had a presence right the way up to the very, very active mosques and the imam leaders there. So there was this really, really broad range of people who kind of came together and used that existing channels of trust to share the message of retrofit and to get people on board to say, you know what, like, in the context that you understand retrofit, like, this is how it can help you. Like, do you understand what they're trying to do? But it took a lot of blood and sweat. So it meant coffee mornings, it meant women only lunches, it meant door knocking, like you mentioned, Filipe. It meant all of those different pieces of to get this buy-in. But they went from having like a handful of people saying, yeah, okay, I'm in, to having 1,400, I think, sign-ups to allow the local authority to actually deliver and spend this lads money that they need to do to meet some of their own targets. 700 committed to actually having the measures done, and there were engagements begun with those 700 households in terms of the actual procurement of works. They've completed 350 measures already from draft proofing. They had hoped to do more external wall insulation than they have done, but inflation, Brexit, all those other things have meant that some of that is out of the picture at the moment. Solar installs are happening aplenty. But what has actually come out of it is all this magic beyond, hey, we want to put some external wall insulation on your home. The pathways of community that have just become strengthened. And then there's all of this other kind of conversation that's developed, because not only was there success in being able to deliver this LAD scheme, but the residents were able to advocate for themselves because they had a strength in numbers that said, okay, yeah, we're doing this, external wall insulation because we love how our houses look. Can we have internal wall insulation? Can we at least investigate that? And then, you know, you get this opportunity for them to understand actually what they want and how it will work for them. And then it sticks, then it stays and it works. So that's happening, and that's not the only place that that's happening. So it's that kind of nature of like understanding that that was from the grassroots in, but there was a good relationship with the local authority there as well. Not every local authority can necessarily know about that. And I was involved in the creation of a report recently with work I did with Dark Matter Labs and Home Energy Action Lab, which was called Community Powered Retrofit. I'll share a link in the chat for that. We did that for London councils. And they've published it on their website so that people can benefit from that. But it was the scoping of the idea of how we capture and replicate this notion of community-powered retrofit. What are the pieces of civic infrastructure that need to be in place? What are the things that local authorities can invest in to almost facilitate this sweep, this uprising of like interest from people? Because it is on everybody's minds. You know, so many people, so many of us are either feel poor or feel concerned so much more than were before. Genuinely anxious about the winter that's coming, and also a lot of problems over the summer that just was, you know, with the overheating as well. So this is a broad issue. This involves everybody, and you know, you've got to move where the opportunity lies. So you can strengthen that. That proves that, you know, an existing government funded scheme was able to be strengthened and actually made more of a success. And then who knows what comes next for those places? You know, the opportunity then for people to have received that information, to have understood that information, to have committed to seeing what can be done. And then what? And then maybe they've seen this work and thought, there could be people there who are like setting up businesses off the back of this because they see there's a potential and they know it's got to happen everywhere. So there's like, it's a really potentially exciting, accelerating way to see more of this done. Now, it's not all unicorns and rainbows, because you will have people who will be like, oh, not for me. Thank you very much. Too much disruption. I'm not into it. But that's just the way it is. Like, we're not going to get like a homogenous approach to this. It will be in pockets that influence other pockets, and then other things will come out of that. And some will be a success and others maybe won't be, because it is also dependent on the needs of particular communities. There's no blanket approach, but there are opportunities in that. So I do feel like every time you ask me a question, I have a big old monologue. So I'm going to be
It's good. Please I completely forgot what my question was. I was so into what you were saying there. Going on to you, Leanne, you've kind of been practicing what you preach, sort of thing, by getting involved in a trial yourself, haven't you, in the smart energy trial in Greenwich? Is that right? Can you tell us what the trial has been and what you've sort of learned by taking part in it, and what your perspective has been as a sort of a resident yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is a trial programme with LGA and Greenwich Council funding. So this was to test energy monitors in social housing residents. So the monitors, they're quite new to the UK market, but they capture electricity use live and also can identify that by different appliances in the home. And that's also accompanied with quite a neat phone app where people can track their use, set goals, and set notifications on different appliances in the home. So it's quite a new I guess builds on a smart meter a little bit. So we really wanted to test this. Is this going to help, people? But alongside the tech, we developed a behavioural design as well. So this included some upfront discussion with residents to understand what they would like to achieve, current concerns or worries about these type of technologies, and that was sort of really informed by the sort of growing research and literature around sort of more deliberative nudges or nudge plus. So not just doing to people, but trying to work with people to help them meet the goals that they'd like to meet. We formed WhatsApp community groups here as well, so that gave us space to share information, tips, independent energy advice to people, and also give communications like why don't you try? So it was trying to encourage people to have a look at different features of the app, to slowly sort of learn that through the process. We provided videos as well, so people had a chance to engage with the app, try different features, and hopefully learn more about their home electricity and by different appliances. We set later on, as the group was more established, we also set some challenges that were sort of social in nature. So we perhaps would give people a bit of a fortnight to focus on a particular type of electricity use in the home and see if they could reduce that as a group, and sort of provide feedback on that as well for them. So through the trial, we really wanted to test, can technology like this help people to understand, manage, potentially reduce their consumption? And as has been noted, we're very aware of the energy cost crisis that we're in. So I think it was about, is there ability to give people more sense of control in this? Can we help them manage? Within this context, bills will be going up anyway, but is there areas that they can manage and have a better understanding and agency there? So we were looking at how people's usage changed, how their energy efficiency literacy was impacted, and also perhaps their interest to then use other devices going forward. So that was a really interesting part of it as well. So I think that was kind of the intersection between community, energy, and digital and knowledge as well. And as you said, we did test it in one of our homes as well. I think it was important for us to see it work in practice. What does it look like? When do I get notifications? When am I perhaps opening it, or how am I responding to the notifications through the app? So that was just kind of to help us shape the communications for what we shared to residents. In terms of what we learned and perhaps some sort of tips there, I think first of all, it really emphasised that residents differ, and I think we could have known that beforehand, but I think it was quite powerful to see that in practice. So how different people engage with the app, when and how did they open it, what were the parts they didn't like or found tricky, how people engage with the community group. Some people absorb all the information, others are quite active, and so looking at that side, and also how ready people were to try the tech, to try the challenges. So I think really got in our minds the need to sort of profile potential users and also just tailor the approach. So I think if we, part of this is about, we're now in the evaluation stage, so we really want to help advise the council on how they could roll this out wider or with a similar type of product. So we're very much thinking about the sorts of residents who may need those sort of tap-in, drop-ins in the community, perhaps to look at the app together and to have in-person support, whereas others actually could have been taken into a bit more of an advanced group perhaps, and had more nuanced, detailed challenges. They could test the app in a bit more advanced way to help us learn more from their experience as well. So I think that was a really key learning around profiling and tailoring. I think, as has been noted before, about managing expectations, that was really important here. The tech, it's quite new, it's not going to be perfect to work straight away, so it's really important that we kind of communicated that in the right way, but also kind of got the message across about the role of a trial, but also how important it is for residents' role in that, so that their feedback was so useful and crucial to help refine the product, and just to make sure they had that confidence that they could be listened to, and whether they wanted to share in the community group or individually or through our interviews or in-person check-ins, they had a chance to really give us a sense of how they found it. What else? I think that tailoring point as well, people's daily life, household priorities, there'll be other things that week that might be top of their priority list that's most important. So I think if you can tailor when and how people can start a challenge or start a new part of the product. I think that's really helpful. And yeah, there's a role of social comparison, so it can be really useful for people to see how they're sort of performing against their neighbours, to help see where they could perhaps reduce their energy use. But we really had to take some care there, because we don't want to cause stress to people. And if people start to feel they were a high energy user, that can really cause people stress, and it may be very, defeat the object. So we had to think really carefully about when and how we provided people feedback, and did it in a sort of careful, considered way. So yeah, so as I said, we're moving to evaluation now, and we're passing feedback back to the technology partner, and also with Greenwich, looking at how we can design these kind of groups going forward, but also thinking about the types of support schemes that people could have to kind of ready themselves for these types of interventions going forward. So I think, it's been something that we've learned a lot through the different elements, and it's been an interesting project in that way.
Thank you very much for talking to us about that. You've kind of all already spoken a little bit about this, but if we focus a little bit more on innovation, and particularly, I think it was Sara that said it's not just about tech or whatever, it's also just different approaches and innovative approaches to engagement. Have you got any good, Sara, you've just spoken about the one actually in Birmingham, but have you got any other sort of examples of something that you've seen that sort of really approached this in a different way that you think would be worth other people sort of adopting, or seeing if they can do something similar with their communities?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, I shared the report that's chock full of case studies, which is quite useful. But I will say that, but I just really, really appreciated Leanne talking about the need to be careful around the social comparison, because I think it sort of points to some of the issues that can happen when you show people too much of their own usage, or it's a balance. You want people to be in control of their usage, but you also want to make sure that you're not saying, oh, it's all your fault, you have to fix this, and I think that's a sort of a systemic issue that we see generally. It was the fossil fuel companies who came up with carbon footprint, individual carbon footprint, like while they take us all to the bank and rinse the planet of everything it's got, that's not a helpful kind of premise. So I think I think people who are doing examples of like information collection, data collection, and also empowerment for individuals to understand their usage are really cognizant of that. So I feel like that's a big win for people in this space who have that nuanced understanding of where the use of showing people their usage lies and how far that should go. I think that's a really, really important thing. So I'm really glad that Leanne pointed that out. But other examples of like innovative, I have to mention Civic Square in this moment if we're going to talk about innovative engagement. And what I love the most about innovative engagement examples is that they're like, the notion of even calling them innovative is wild, because it's about actual person-to-person relationships. It's about making things not always about like, you must receive this information and you must learn and you must take this forward and you must do things with it. It's actually about creating spaces for people to be together. And it's an interesting thing for us all to think about the fact that there has been a demise in the commons, in the notion of the commons. Where can you go in a city that you don't need to have money in your pocket? Like the library, maybe. That's maybe about it. Like a park, but even then, is it really somewhere that you can just be, or are you expected to? I know we have to be good people to each other, but there's still expectations in certain places, and there's very little of the commons left, and I think that's a real threat. So we need to make sure that we're providing spaces that people can just be with each other as well. So what Civic Square have done, and Civic Square are an organization, again in Birmingham, great stuff happening in Birmingham. I'll drop a note in, I'll drop something in the chat as well for any Birmingham residents who might be on the call. There's an incredible beginning of a series of retrofit events starting this weekend. So I'll mention more of that later. But Civic Square are really, really worth checking out, and they're connected to these events as well. What they've essentially done is like start started a really deep engagement with their community in Ladywood in Birmingham, but it's been happening for years. You know, they've been in there with deep involvement and just working out what it is like to understand your community together, to create space for people to be together, to talk about opportunities within their community. I'm going to share some information because that'll be much better. They're also really great at visually sharing their stories, so it's very clear what the kind of work is that they do. But they talk about, they're in the depths of this neighbourhood transition. In fact, I do have, they did their own neighbourhood donut portrait, and they took the principles of donut economics and said, well, what would it look like to apply the donut? How do we get into the donut in our community? And so for anybody who's not familiar with the donut, that's the concept of donut economics. It's written by Kate Rayworth, which talks about the fact that, you know, the exponential growth curve in economics is what's gotten us into this mess. Like, how can you possibly overlay an endless growth curve over a finite system that is a planet? It doesn't make any sense. So you have the external line of the donut, which is planetary boundaries, which we just cannot continue to exceed in the way we are. And the inner ring of the donut is the social foundation, whereby, you know, people and humanity needs to stay above to thrive. So we need to have access to education, to clean water, to housing, you know, to your own rights as a citizen, like all of those things. And they applied that in their community, and that's been, I think, a part of a long, like, ongoing piece of work there. And so that's about slow engagement that means something, that builds, not about like, oh, if you do this, you'll get that. If you apply this thing, you'll win that thing. So it's a whole different way of approaching how we engage and how we view community, as not as an entity of people who need to be pitied and have stuff done to, but as people who have so much to offer and give and need to be respected in order to have livelihoods that allow them to thrive. And it's us, it's all of us. And when we talk about community, it's not that group over there, the over 60s lunch club meeting on a Friday, or the after school like drop-in club. It's everything. It's like, it's the supply chain, it's the where the materials are coming from, it's the people who run your corner shops, it's everything. And we all have a stake in this because it affects all of us. So what I'll do is just it'll be much more clear. It's quite a broad topic. It's not specifically about insulation or about anything in that sort of quite specific piece. It's much more about laying the groundwork for a rebirth of what it is to be in community as a verb, not a noun, I suppose. So there's a series of events that are kicking off this weekend. The first one is in Birmingham. The whole series of events is called Retrofit Reimagined. There will be one in Birmingham over Friday and Saturday, I think, but I'll drop it in the chat. The next one will be the closing day of the Retrofit 23 exhibition in the Building Centre in London. So some of you will be familiar with that. Great exhibition that's been on all summer with a programme of talks and events that's been happening. One in Bristol in collaboration with We Can Make. There'll be one at the Centre for Alternative Technology in October, late October, and that's an incredible place for anybody. I've only ever been there once, and it's really brilliant. It's amazing. It's just like out in the woods in Wales, and they're just doing incredible work there. And then the finale will be in Glasgow on the 11th of November. So it's all across the country, range of different programs of things that are happening. I'll share it in the chat, and I'm very happy to take any questions about any of that.
Thank you very much. We've got quite a few questions coming in, so I'm going to go to some of them now, if that's all right with everybody. So firstly, okay, so Steve wants to create some information for residents on how to get the best from having solar PV, like how to get the most out of it, to make sure that it's engaging and not preaching, he said. So have any of you got experience of creating these sorts of easy to understand guides for residents, or have you seen others produced by other people that you would recommend as a sort of starting point?
I can just give our experience in Preston. we did, like Sara mentioned, map the community and understand, for example, what languages are more widely spoken, and how people want to gather information. And that we did learn through community inside groups and engaging with the community already. So it's not a fit for all situation or an easy guide to do. But I would say in this case, what we really learn is that less is more. So keep it simple, keep it easy to read, in different languages for your community or for wherever you're gonna develop the project, and tailor for their specific needs. And you might need several different templates depending on the area. And it's very, very hard for you to get, like Sara said, so one solution that fits all.
Thank you. That kind of leads on to another question, which we've sort of covered a little bit, but probably not. We probably need another 5 hours. So we've sort of been talking about the engagement in terms of retrofit programs and getting them started, but when it comes to actually how to make the most out of whatever measures they've had installed, I mean, that's a different issue. I mean, Leanne, you were talking about it a little bit with your smart meters thing, but I mean, that is a completely different issue, isn't it? Because if you have a heat pump or solar PV or whatever, and you don't know how to solar PV kind of operates on its own, but you know what I mean? If you don't know how to get the most out of it, and you don't know that you can't just keep heating on and off and things like that. So that is also something that needs to be addressed, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll refer actually to, we've been doing some research with UCL for the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, looking at hard to decarbonise homes and how to identify those, and and trying to surface what approaches are actually out there that are effective there, and looking at that from a wide perspective. So not just the physical technical aspects of the home, but also the social, the economic, the behavioural, the supply chain, sort of the system level factors as well. Because I think these all touch on things we spoke about today. There's so many interactions, and whether it's the role of the installer, the supply chain aspects, whether it's disruption and how to look at that mixed tenureship. There's a whole range of factors that can make things seem or be a bit more difficult or complex. But through this research, what's been really good is that this has brought out a set of case studies, which will hopefully be published soon, of which Filipe and his organisation are one of those. But it's been great to sort of hear from others in industry who are doing great things. And we've put together these case studies as part of this report. And I think what's been common there is people have been thinking about the post work, and they've been thinking about the co-benefits. So it is about how do we think earlier on about how people can then understand good home practices, good home maintenance. Beyond the retrofit work, it's not just going in and coming out and leaving that behind. And there's been some really nice examples of different ways to deliver that, home guides, really go around the home, returning later, revisiting that, and really helping people to develop that understanding of good home practices. So that's something I'd flag up. And I think what's also been common throughout these case studies is collaboration, community level partners. And there's been some really nice, some really nice examples out there, whether it's from community energy groups who are doing fantastic work, those who are looking at, if you've got a contractor on site with a presence, how can you utilise that? Can you have a bit of a drop in where people can have access to other services that might relate to health, well-being? Perhaps people in the neighbourhood, might be some people who are interested in doing some training in that, or going along and to actually see what type of, what is a green job, what's a retrofit actually look like. So there's a whole range of nice, intersections in if you utilise that contractor site presence, perhaps also the social value element as well. There's hopefully really nice things you can do there that provides people more of a wider support and different ways they can access, engage with, and learn about retrofit or the accompanying benefits for them in terms of home comfort and other sort of benefits to the neighbourhood.
Thank you. Staying with you, Leanne, there's a question from Daniel who has said, thank you for the fantastic information and how refreshing it is to listen to you. But he's also said, when you're talking about the social comparisons and risk of punishment rather than incentive, how do you incentivize residents to give feedback and engage other than promising them lower bills or warmer homes? I guess, are there other incentives that you can offer them when you're talking about energy reduction?
Yeah, okay, sure. No, that's a really good question. I think there's a few things to consider there. So I think first of all, it's about, I think if you're doing a trial like this, I think you need to think carefully about who's suitable to take part in the trial. You know, you don't want to have people come on and actually it's quite burdensome for them. It, yeah, again, could cause them stress, and perhaps they're in a position where, you know, it's actually not going to be so helpful for them. And actually they may benefit later on once you've got a process and a product set up that can work well for people. So I think, yeah, first of all, I think it's important to consider that at the sort of the recruitment stage. And, you know, we worked with local community groups and those who work in Greenwich on fuel poverty. There's a range of, you know, community and charity trusts that are already signposting people to support. So they were great to work with on this to actually help us see, you know, utilize what they already knew about who could be suitable for a trial like this. You know, because this was, you know, for the benefit of social housing residents. So we really wanted to think through who would suit this trial. And then, you know, going through, you know, it was that care, it was about support, you know, and people responded differently to different ways of receiving information. I think it was trying to understand that early on. So we wanted to understand people's current, you know, are they someone quite active on Facebook or WhatsApp, or actually do they, you know, prefer different types of communication? So yeah, for some people, there may be more one-to-one talking through the app, what they found through it, because, you know, the data's there in the app if people, you know, are able once to look through their usage. So it was supporting people perhaps on a one-to-one basis. For others, you know, they were able to share with other people and, you know, talk through how they've managed to change part of their usage, for example. So I think we just needed to be responsive to how people were experiencing it throughout. And, you know, we had other points where people could check in with us, so we was able to adapt our approach. But we were cautious we wasn't going to be putting in any kind of, you know, tables or, you know, how people performing. That wasn't what it's about. It's more people's own like goal setting. So through the app, they could set themselves a personal goal. Perhaps they wanted to save this much or, you know, this range of energy, and we spoke to them about that earlier on. So and whilst the technology company have a sort of a wider database of household comparisons, we had a discussion about that and whether that was useful, and we kind of veered towards not using that, at least at the start. So that's something we can look at a bit later on. But yeah, I hope that helps answer. But yeah, happy to talk more about it.
Thank you very much. I think we've probably got time for one more question. So this is from Elliot, and he says, do any of you have experience on projects that include site regeneration aiming to improve human, social and other environmental metrics alongside decarbonisation? Anyone like to chip in? And then he did say this might be synergies born out of decarbonisation, or perhaps activities that are independent additions to your projects.
I'm kind of struck by when you walk past most new housing developments at the moment with their hoarding around the site, everybody's jumping in on the colour scheme as well of their hoarding. So it's all a bit green, and it's all got, you know, statements of the most sustainable housing development in London or wherever you are in the country. I happen to be in London. And also big claims about training. You know, we're training everybody on site and all of these things. So I think there's aspiration there, and I think some of that is true. I do think we've got to be really, really careful about greenwashing in this space, because you got to dig deeper on some of these claims. I know this isn't exactly the example, because I think what comes to mind is, from what it sounds like Leanne's been talking about, Filipe's experience, and from the things that I had in the case study, we're all talking about stuff that's actually really quite hard to have a great big banner moment about. It's very, very hard to cut a ribbon in front of some of the things that we've been talking about. And actually that's really where the important level of work happens. So I would say that there are lots of examples where actually the starting point is about the social and environmental metrics, that then you want the scheme or the work or whatever that comes out of it to be founded on the sort of on a different set of principles, on a different way of doing things. Sometimes what you see happening is that you do get like a much stronger bedrock of like engagement on the social side of things, but the procurement methods haven't been challenged. And so all this good work that starts out, you know, with this embedded engagement, and actually I was on a call with Shan Berry from the Green Party the other day, who was describing exactly that experience that they had where they had been like really funneling this sort of real different engaged and governance and ownership ways with the community to deliver a scheme. And then when it was procured, it was like a contractor-led scheme came in and that was it. And everything else had just gone by the wayside because you cannot do just one piece of it. I think both Filipe and Leanne have referred to this being a systemic change issue. So whilst, you know, doing all the work around engaging people and ensuring that people feel involved in it, it's what we are getting them involved also has to change. That also needs to be fundamentally different in what is on the bottom line. Are you looking for 80% value, or are you looking for much more in carbon metrics and social metrics that are measured and therefore valued? And if we don't change those bits at the same time, then we're continuing to just load the pressure on the shoulders of individuals again, instead of actually the system, which is the thing that needs to change in order to serve the needs of society and communities. So I think it's really important when we talk about those things to make sure we're really actually getting in on the bits that need to change and demanding better as well if it isn't happening across the board. And it's not easy, but like it's where the work has to happen.
I just want to add that NEA, for example, in the project we're developing Preston, we do try to involve with the community as much as we can to create this trust relationship. So we did provide energy advice in the area, did little energy cafes, applied to other funding streams of the local authorities and other stakeholders that are on site to create a presence. And we ended up in getting involved with a lot of local stakeholders, religious groups, women's groups, the Preston Community Center, and that helped us provide other outcomes and independent additions to our project, side by side with the project of the repair and retrofit. So we can also share a little bit of information. And we did also try to engage with the local college to bring the local students in. It was a lot of different arms of this project, not only the retrofit in our case.
Thank you very much. We've just gone over time. Sorry, Julia, if she's in the background cursing me. Thank you, Sara, Filipe, and Leanne for joining us today. Thanks everyone in the audience for persevering through various technical problems. Hope you've really enjoyed it. It will be available to watch on demand pretty much immediately afterwards on the same link if you wanted to share it with any colleagues or anything. And yeah, I hope to see you again on another Elemental session soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.